I appreciate everyone being here today, whether as a panelist or an attendee. This is the May iteration of the Brownfield Technical Assistance Program's monthly webinar series. This month, Seal the Deal, developing public-private partnerships for Brownfields projects. So we're going to be talking, Jeff O'Brien will be talking about how to develop public-private partnerships for these brownfields projects and sorting out the nuance and defining roles within that. Before we get into that, I'm gonna, do a little setting the table for us today. Tell you about our brownfield series if you have never been to one before. So this webinar series is part of a partnership between my organization, Blueprint Kentucky, and the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet's Brownfields office. So, in that partnership, myself, Tyler McDaniel, I work with Kirsten O'Leary, Annabelle Peterson, and others to sort of bring these brownfields services to communities around the state. We do that through on-the-ground workshops. You may have heard about or come to one of our day-long or two-day-long brownfield boot camps before. We teach about community engagement, community voice, and I like to frame the partnership as that us at Blueprint Kentucky, we do all the sort of people forward stuff around community engagement, and then our friends at the state do a lot of the meaty sort of technical and regulatory work. But in this partnership, it allows us to reach more communities through those kinds of education efforts, the outreach efforts, and that includes amplifying these like really great perspectives and stories of folks who have been through the program and worked on projects around brownfield redevelopment. Um, so we firmly believe that in doing this and by putting people first in these processes and in redevelopments, that we can create like really sort of bigger long-term impacts in communities that reverberate outwards. So if your community has an old building that you think might be a brownfield, please reach out to me or reach out to Kirsten at the state, and we'll get you set up and we'll come and talk to you and get a phase one done. Um, so I'm delighted today to be able to introduce to you Jeff O'Brien, the Executive Director of the Cabinet for Economic Development in Louisville Metro Government. He's going to be sharing about multiple projects of different sizes with different types of partners that they have worked with around the city. Really cool stuff, and I think it's very inspiring when you look at some of these projects and how far they've come. We also have with us as a panelist here Keith Hatton, who's been helping me immensely in getting this whole thing set up. So kudos to Keith. And yeah, I'm gonna hand it over to Jeff to get us going.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. Yeah, talk a little bit about some of the great brownfields work that we've done here in Louisville. And I'll just give a plug for working with our partners at the state. We work very closely with our state partners on all of these projects, and they're just critical to our success and all this. So just that's going to be mentioned before, but since Tyler mentioned the state, I just want to throw it out there on how important that having that foundation and those relationships are when you go into any of these projects. So we can move on to the next slide, Tyler, and I'll just kind of walk through, just give an overview of kind of where we are here at Louisville Metro. So since 2007, you'll see that we've received almost $5 million from the US EPA for brownfield cleanup. A lot of that we put out as grants and loans to private for-profit developers. That's primarily loans, and then we'll do grants to our nonprofit development partners. The city's used that money itself to clean up. So that the picture there on the left-hand side is the Louisville Gardens, and we used $1.4 million of our brownfield money 2 years ago to remediate asbestos and lead in that building as we get ready to transform it. So that's the city helping itself. The picture in the middle there is our Goodwill Opportunity Campus, which was a former manufacturing facility at 28th and Broadway in Louisville's historic Parkland neighborhood. That building is built with our nonprofit partner, and again, We are, as I said before, $4.8 million overall, and 800,000, just under 900,000 has gone to our nonprofit partners. And then the project on the far left-hand side, Liminal, they're a private developer. They're converting that warehouse building into naturally occurring affordable housing in our Portland neighborhood. And then we used $400,000 for that. More important, we applied for $400,000 in future use loans, and that's one of the sources that we use when we go and do redevelopment projects. That project is currently under construction, so we can move on to the next slide. We talk a lot about what Louisville Metro does when it is looking at our brownfields. We look at really the key consideration that we have for any of these projects, or what type of contamination is impacting the project, what's going to be the complexity in terms of what is the new use going to be. That's going to kind of drive what partnership structure we use. And so the things that the city does when we start entering these conversations with either a private developer or with our Metro Council or with the mayor's office is, we determine, okay, what's on the books? What do we foresee in this property's future? And then from there, what do we think are going to be the best tools that we can deploy to clean the property up? So the projects really vary from project to project in terms of how we structure these deals. The first thing that we'll look at, and we'll go through these a little bit, is we'll look at, do we actually own the land? If Louisville Metro doesn't own the land, is there an easy path for us to get the land on either a donation basis or go acquire it on the private market? We'll look at, can we deploy our tax-based incentives? So can we deploy TIF, tax increments financing? Can we deploy any of the state's tax credit tools? Can we deploy industrial revenue bonds? And then we'll look at what's our capacity in terms of our EPA brownfield funding that we can deploy via either loans and grants. And again, if we have that's a pretty easy bar for us to cross. If we're dealing with ourselves, obviously that's a grant. If we're dealing with nonprofit partners, that's more often than not going to be a grant. And if we're dealing with for-profit partners, that's usually going to be a loan. Again, like I said, the project complexity is just the key consideration. So we have some really complex projects in our pipeline, and I'll kind of get through that when we move through the program. But if we're looking at taking a brownfield site and moving it up to residential standards, we're really going to probably be deploying more cleanup funds, and so we're really looking at how best to structure that partnership depending on what the overall complexity of the project is. We're also going to look at what's the market interest. So what's the demand in the community? Is there a community in a strategic plan? Do we have a neighborhood plan? Do we need to go get zoning entitlements? Those sorts of things that we'll be looking at. And then lastly, like what's the project timing? So what's the developer's timeline? What's Metro's timeline? Are there other critical projects that are on the timeline that will connect with that potential redevelopment site? And then finally, alignment here, and this is really important, the alignment with the community. So community engagement, and in this presentation, I'm going to give you a couple of really positive examples of community engagement and some really tough examples that we've had with community engagement. Again, I mentioned this corridor and strategy plans. I mean, we have multiple brownfields throughout our community. Obviously, Louisville is a city that is heavily industrialized. So we have parts of the community that have underused and vacant industrial land that is kind of changed as population and the economy has shifted over time. So, what have we done planning for those corridors where these properties exist, or do we need to go out and do some more front end community engagement? And then where are there existing partnerships? Like where can we leverage our existing relationships that we have with the development community and our nonprofit community? So we can move on to the next one. So let me talk about a really successful and exciting project. So what you have in front of you here is what we affectionately call the Rhodia site. This is a former paint solvent site in Louisville's Park Hill neighborhood. It's right at, if you're familiar with Louisville, it's right off of the Oak Street exit on 9th Street. So this is an 18-acre site that we own. We purchased the site in the late 1990s. This was we were going to use this site for an economic development project related to our auto manufacturing here in Louisville. This site was actually part of the federal EPA's pilot brownfield program, so we were all just learning here in the late 90s on how to use that property. We went through a demolition process and then finally acquired the site once the demolition was complete in 2002. So this site was left with the typical urban contamination where we had industrial use. We have volatile organic compounds, we have heavy metals, we have hydrocarbons, and we really have a big plume of contamination in the groundwater of the property. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So the site we owned the site. We've been underused. It is immediately east of our the Parkway Place public housing facility. So there's about 800 residents in public housing that live across the site from this 18-acre site. And so this building is the last remaining building on site. It's a historic landmark. It's one of the first concrete structures in Louisville. We left this building standing as we think it's a good opportunity for redevelopment and provide some tie back to the history of the site. But the site is overgrown with weeds. It was almost entirely paved, so there's places where there are old holding tanks and other underground tanks. So the site's pretty hazardous when you walk up on it, just in terms of tripping hazards and falling hazards. So I think that as the city owned this, we decided, look, we have to do something better with the site. Park Hill is one of our poorest neighborhoods in the community. So we're really trying to help that community and help provide some affordable housing on the site or other productive use on the site. In 2020, we put this out for solicitation of interest. So you all might recall 2020, we put it out in January of 2020 with responses due back in spring of 2020. So that made it very challenging to go through this process on top of a very challenging property. Our Brownfields manager in our office at the time, Allison Smith, some of you may know Dr. Allison Smith. She did a wonderful job working with the state cabinet on getting to understand the site and what we can and can't do in terms of redeveloping the site. But we had all that information out. We have a great plan to roll it out to the community. We did community engagement on the front end, telling them, hey, we're finally going to get this piece of property developed. And then COVID happens and we're promptly in shutdown and trying to go through a public solicitation process where we wanted a lot of community involvement. Eventually, we did get to those public engagements. We had outdoor gatherings when it was safe and allowed and let developers present their plans. We only had one response to this, and it was for the Reland Group, which is a minority-owned development company here in Louisville. And they proposed to put housing on the site. And so we really we worked with them. We've got put a development agreement together in 2000, and they just most recently received an allocation from the state in this latest legislative session to build approximately 300 units on the sites. We can go to the next slide, Tyler. So here's kind of an overall site plan. The city used about $9 million of its ARP money to remediate the site. We were able to get the Metro Council to dedicate $10 million to it. So we spent just under $9 million to remediate. And then we'll be using $1.3 million to help do infrastructure for the install. The developer received an allocation from the Kentucky Housing Corporation of $31 million in LIHTC bond funds. So we'll be putting that forward to redevelop the site and get apartments and amenities on the northern half of the tract. That's the part of the parcel that's been remediated. The southern half of the tract, where you see that big giant navy blob, that's still unremediated, and we're looking at potential for uses on that site. So that deal, again, we have a redevelopment agreement with the Reland company. They will be redeveloping the site. We will sell the site to them for $1. We are currently working through the environmental covenant with the responsible party. So that's always one of the trickiest parts of these projects is you've got to look at the environmental covenants and make sure that those third parties are going to agree with those covenants. So we're working through that right now with the group. Unfortunately, we've run into a little bit of challenges, so we had to go with the developer to the state and change the law. Actually, the developer carried the bulk of that load, working with Senator Herron, who is the representative of this district, and getting Senate Bill 222 put through in the latest legislative cycle. So we're excited to see this project come to fruition, and hopefully will be under construction later this year. We can move on to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about something that is existing. That one's not yet under construction, but we'll talk about something that is under construction and exists. So look at these lovely junk cars here on the screen. This is what was formerly on the site of where Louisville's soccer stadium is, Lynn Family Stadium. This was a site that Louisville Metro developed in conjunction with Soccer Holdings. They put together a development plan and built a soccer stadium. The city worked with the developer. We were able to get Metro Council to issue bonds to purchase the land and start doing the remediation. So the developer will pay us back for the land on that deal. But this site is just south of Witherspoon. It's adjacent to River Road, so right on the banks of the Ohio River and kind of continuing immediately outside of the Big Four Bridge area at Waterfront Park. And the site was, again, the site was challenging. We had junk automobiles. We had an old tank farm. There was an underused public storage facility that existed where the stadium is now. So we can move to that next slide. So this again was a way this shows us our soccer stadium set up for the new football team that's here in Louisville, the Louisville Kings, but it's usually set up for soccer, so the other kind of football. But here it is in its most recent configuration. So this project, again, Louisville Metro owns this land. The developer used private financing and state tax increment financing to build the soccer stadium. The soccer stadium cost just under $100 million to build. The stadium seats 12,000 people. It is expandable to the level needed for MLS, so it can be expanded to MLS. At the time when we built the stadium, we only had the Louisville City, the men's USFL team here, Racing Louisville, the National Women's Professional Soccer League. They also are in the stadium as well, so they share this stadium. But when we built this, we only had the one team, and then Racing Louisville came along as well. So what's happening here is, again, we own the land. The developer owns the soccer stadium. They pay us a lease for that land. The parking lots around the stadium are meant for development. Again, the stadium's opening date was slated for April of 2020. So some of the development that was going to happen around the stadium has not happened yet, but we're working through a couple of projects to bring development to the site. The site does require ongoing collaboration. We work with the Soccer Holdings Group to ensure that we are doing the required monitoring and making sure that we're continuing to maintain the site management plan. In addition to all the other environmental challenges that this property posed in terms of contamination, it also happens to be in the floodplain of the Ohio River, so just adding to some complexity here. But again, we had junk cars and an old tank farm and some underused public storage that was creating some challenges on the site. This development is one of the, it did win the 2022 Phoenix Award for Brownfield Development, so that's the highest achievement that a Brownfield development can get, and it's of course a beloved asset in the community. So we can move to the next slide. And so here's the Louisville Gardens. I mentioned this in the beginning. This is a site that the city owns. It is a historic armory building that is actually just to the west of me. It's the building immediately behind the building I'm sitting in. For years and years and years, this venue hosted graduations, concerts. So everybody from Frank Sinatra to Van Halen to My Morning Jacket have played at this facility. The last concert occurred in this building in 2007. So it's sat vacant and quiet for nearly 20 years. Um, we've looked at numerous things to site in this building. The current development that we're working on is to rehab it into sound stages. So with the city's or with the state's production tax credit, we're looking to transform this building into sound stages, and we're working with a local developer and a group out of Texas to convert this building. As I mentioned at the top, we spent $1.4 million from our federal funding to remediate asbestos and lead from this building. Of course, it's a building that's over 120 years old, so as you can imagine, there's a lot of lead and asbestos containing materials in it. And the developer is now looking. You'll see that's a cross section. The back of the building is actually not coming off; it's just a cross section, so you can get an idea of what how the studios would fit in there, and then how that relates to the property across the street, which is state owned. So this is a $70 million project working with a private developer. We're hoping that that project gets under construction later this year. And we can move on to the next one. Okay, this is another stadium project that we did in downtown. Again, those of you that are familiar with downtown Louisville will know that our waterfront has undergone a renaissance in the last 30 years. Slugger Field is part of that renaissance. So this is a project that the city undertook in the late 1990s. We converted the old Brindley Harding building, which is that building there on your left, into Louisville Slugger Field. So we tried to incorporate as much of that building as we could. But again, this site was had a lot of contamination. There was scrap metal yards. There was electrical infrastructure here. Actually, in center field, we found the old channel for Beargrass Creek in the late 1800s. The city moved Beargrass Creek further to the east. So Beargrass Creek used to run through center field. So we had quite a bit of remediation from that move. We actually dug a big pit along Main Street as we did remediation on site for that. So that parking lot immediately to the east is where we did a lot of the remediation. We're going to have to actually address it now as we go through a mixed use development. But again, this is a site that the city owns. The Louisville Bats, which is owned by Diamond Baseball Holdings, they maintain the city. We share responsibilities in terms of monitoring and ensuring that the site management plan stays in place. The Bats pay us a lease every year that's in the neighborhood of $500,000. We use the proceeds from that lease to help fund our downtown management corporation. So they're able to do activities with that with those lease payments on the site. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So again, we've got a lot of successful partnerships, and we customize it to every project. So again, in the case of the Louisville Bats, we had a minor league baseball team. They played down at the old Cardinal Stadium. For those of you that remember Cardinal Stadium, it was then moved downtown as part of our downtown revitalization efforts. So we have a primary tenant there for a little while. The soccer team did play. The men's soccer club played in that stadium as well. The picture there on the upper right, that's our urban government center. So I mentioned about robust public engagement. That is a example of some rather difficult public engagement. We've gone through a number of developers to develop the site. It's an old hospital site that the city owned. It's in the Highlands neighborhood. It's about 12 acres all told of land. The buildings were demolished using the state's decontamination tax credit. So that was our first deployment of that relatively new tool. But the neighbors were upset with the project. We went through several development partners and were able to address the property. But the demolition of the site alone was $10 million or approached $10 million. So there's some real challenges with that site. Needless to say, because of the community engagement, we started that project in 2017, and the buildings were demolished in early 2026. So it took us almost 10 years to get to that, just due to some of the challenges with community engagement throughout the project. It really will probably face challenges going forward as well due to those issues. The project on the bottom is our Norton Sports and Learning Complex. This is a project that the Louisville Urban League undertook. And again, this was 30 acres of city-owned land in the Russell neighborhood, right at 30th and Muhammad Ali. This site, again, we owned it. It used to be the National Tobacco Company. The buildings were torn down and removed, and we went through a process to find a development partner for the site. It was originally going to be the West Louisville Food Port. That project went away due to some financial challenges. We worked with the neighborhood and we worked on a solicitation of interest and got the land to the Louisville Urban League to build this world-class track and field facility, indoor track and field facility. That facility is actually up, as you can see from the picture there, in use. The city did put $10 million of bond funding to help construct the facility, and then the Urban League did the remainder of the fundraising for that site. Okay, you want to move to the next slide? Okay, so again, I think the keys that we always have in our partnerships is number one, what's the project that you want to accomplish? Again, if it's a city-owned project, are we putting out a solicitation of interest? Are we putting that out just because we have a piece of land and we need to do something with that land? Or are we putting it out because we have a specific corridor plan or neighborhood plan that says that we need to go and redevelop the site and put some productive use in that the community has told us that they want? That kind of sets your upfront parameter. From there, we select what tools we have in our tool belt to address the site. As you can see, we've used a range of bond funding to acquire land. We've used federal funding to do remediation. We partnered with the state, in this case of the soccer stadium, on tax increment financing and tax-based incentives. When we work with Diamond Baseball Holdings to develop the parking lot at Slugger Field, again, we will deploy TIF and industrial revenue bonds to bring that development to fruition. And then I think clearly defining the roles in terms of who is doing what monitoring and ensuring that we are in compliance. Again, in the cases where the city owns the land, we are on the hook for compliance. So we want to make sure that the responsible party is working with us and we have clear roles defined. This has been a challenge, especially in some of our older agreements. And as monitoring and compliance have gotten more sophisticated at the state and federal level, we've had some challenges in getting private development partners to understand that they need to do the work for us, and then we do the reporting. I'd also say, like, clearly defining like who's doing the phase one. I mean, we've got a really bad example of a case where we acquired some land but skipped doing the phase one, so we're on the hook forever now doing the groundwater monitoring, which costs the city about $10,000 a year. And again, I think that's just critical to define those roles up front and have specifics around those roles. And then, those tools, all the tools that we deploy, we have reporting mechanisms throughout the beginning stages of the project's life. So I like to say beginning stages, that goes up 10 to 20 years, depending on what our reporting tool is. And I think long-term success for projects, really the public engagement has got to be key. The successful projects that we have here have happened because we've had some great community engagement. We had a whole group of people that for the soccer stadium were asking us to build a soccer stadium, and that was not just people in the Butchertown neighborhood, that was people across the community. In fact, when we announced where the stadium was going to be, there were big banners along I-71 that said, "Build it now." And then as we were going through the development and announced the development was going to happen, the signs changed to "We are going to build it," to when it was actually under construction, the sign changed to "We are building it." And when it was finally done, it said "We built it." So it was just kind of a good example of how the public gets behind these projects, and now it's led to ongoing success, and it attracts a lot of people into the area. I think that ongoing collaboration and coordination with project owners is important once we get outside of it, just to make sure that we continue to have a successful project and it remains a piece that we're all proud of. And then finally, my final takeaway on this is none of these projects happen with just government getting behind it. I mean, we do need private partners to help us bring projects to fruition. So whether it's Diamond Baseball Holdings and doing a mixed use development and owning baseball teams, or whether it's the Louisville Urban League bringing a much needed asset to the Russell neighborhood. It really relies on those key and committed partners to make sure that we can get projects done and get them executed in a timely fashion. So with that, I'll stop talking. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. But we're really excited to do brownfield development and help others across the Commonwealth do brownfield development. Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you, Jeff. That was great. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A section, and I'm happy to ask those as they come up. In the meantime, I have a couple that come up for me as we were as you were giving that presentation, and just want to start by saying like that it was so cool to see all those projects, and especially I used to live in Louisville in my 20s, and I remember when the Lynn Family Stadium began, and have been fortunate enough to have some meetings now in my 30s at the Goodwill Opportunity Campus, and it's just really cool to see these sites come to life in these ways. So kudos to y'all for doing this work. I think a thing throughout everything that you were talking about was this like, and something we try to talk about is the idea of how long these projects take, um, and how it can be, 10 years, 20 years. There's a project in Maysville that the building has been abandoned for nearly 50 years. So these are really big scopes here, and I'm curious, like, how do you keep momentum going? And as you're doing that, how do you also identify the right developer who meets the moment?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, it really varies from project to project. And I think that, in the case of the soccer stadiums, we'll look at that one. We have we have a group of people that want to bring professional soccer to Louisville. And so, whatever your opinions are about professional sports and the need for that in our communities, there was a private group that was like, we're going to bring a soccer team to Louisville. They were able to get the team from USFL, and then the what the group was able to make a deal with Metro and with the previous owners of the Louisville Bats to get that project into the baseball stadium, just kind of a proof of concept sort of deal. And then that started growing, and people were seeing like, oh, this is really successful. We're selling these games out. We're drawing a crowd. The community is excited about this. Like there's an opportunity here. We don't want to move the stadium. We need a new stadium because all the things that teams do to really drive revenue at their facilities is to sell food and sell beer and sell merch. I mean, it's like same thing for like if you go to a concert. So all of those proceeds were going to the Louisville Bats, so and not the Louisville FC. So we had there were some real challenges there. So we had a motivated private group that wanted to do something. They wanted to keep it in the area. They saw an opportunity to redevelop a underused plot of land in the Butchertown neighborhood. And at the same time, on the other side of the city was talking about investing in the Urban League's track and field complex. So it became a comment about let's transform these properties that have long been challenges in our neighborhoods, and let's do them together. Let's go and issue bonds to help bring these projects to fruition. The community is telling us they want them. And so that there was really an opportunity to meet the moment for both of those projects. And for the Urban League, there was just some real intentional community engagement, trying to understand what the community wanted. There had been some pushback on the West Louisville Food Hub. And so they were really able to, we were able to build momentum through just a robust public engagement process and really making sure that the community was continuing to stay on board. So I really think it's just finding the right time and moment. In the case of the Rhodia property, again, that's a piece of property that the city had owned for 20 years and really had been involved with for nearly 30 years before we ever went and did something. And I think it really got to a point of we're sick and tired of mowing the grass. there's a real opportunity. We have a real need for industrial land in Jefferson County. This is where the motivation came from. And we have a real challenged housing development at Parkway Place. And so I think that for those of you again that are familiar with Louisville, all of our barrack style public housing complexes have been redeveloped, except for Parkway Place. And so we knew that was going to be next on the housing authority's list of things to do. So we thought the moment was right to put that out so that the housing authority would have an easier time working with HUD to get the grants they need to transform that site into a better public housing facility. And lo and behold, we were able to attract a minority owned developer that wants to build housing. So, and they were thinking like we can help with the housing authority's redevelopment project and not displace residents from their neighborhood. And so that's that's part of the motivations there. And again, it's just timing around those projects. And again, we're like you said, we're talking about 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and it just kind of takes that continual push. In fact, in my office, I have up against the wall, which I will hand to the developer when we cut the ribbon on their housing development of the Rhodia site when it was fully up and running. One of them is from 11 days after my birthday, my actual birthday. So, it's crazy to see how that site had looked 50 years ago and what it's going to look like, 50 years later with housing and residents on it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like people often wonder it's kind of like the chicken or the egg of development. It's like does the development come first or does the developer come first, you know?
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's a mix, right? It's an unanswerable question. And but I am curious about the with the food bank site, with that sort of being, where you're going and then things shifting, and then going back to the community engagement piece. I'm just curious if you could speak to some of the community engagement strategies, like what you use in a really big pivot like that to identify a new site reuse, to identify your new developers.
Yeah, I think it would be, this would be a lesson learned in what not to do. I mean, that project fell apart for financing reasons. It was, anytime you're doing something that's involving local food and the local food economy, it's really challenging to make the numbers work. So the food hub project was kind of hanging on for dear life. But the nail that was driven into the coffin was there were concerns around that we had a proposed biodigester in the West End here. And it was a really ugly conversation. It wasn't going to go on the food hub site. It was going to go on another site in the West End to handle all the bio waste that's coming from the distilleries in the California neighborhood. But what happened was through that conversation, the food hub had always included a biodigester on its site just to handle the food waste that was coming from that site. And so as we were having these biodigester conversations, it was the issue was raised in regard to the food hub site, but that just kind of fell apart. So again, here the city is holding a 30-acre piece of land in Russell and not having a plan for it, or being back to square one, I should say. And so really we worked with the University of Louisville and the neighbors to do a more robust series of meetings. And it wasn't just, I'd say meetings, but it was way more than that. It was really an all hands on deck, trying to put together a process of having small group conversations and try to understand what we were going to put on the site. Ultimately, we ended up with basically a competition style solicitation where we were asking developers, hey, we asked the community, what do you want to see? We put together a solicitation of interest that went out, and then we received, I believe it was 5 proposals, maybe 6 proposals, and this was the one that was selected as the winner and the best fit for the site. And again, that's just one of those things where we've waited for something to come on the property. We can wait, we can be patient. We can wait a few more months and do a more robust engagement period to try to, okay, we hear you. We don't want biodigesters or any more noxious uses in our West End. How do we pivot there, and how do we get something that's really an asset for the community? And again, I think it's just with all these things, it's patience and perseverance and just understanding like we've got to go and do the work, the legwork in the neighborhoods to uh, understand what the community wants.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably get yelled at a little bit as well. And but I love the idea of the kind of like opening it up to the design competition. Really love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
We do have a question here from Joseph Browning, that if a local government does not own the property but is interested in purchasing, will the state perform a phase one to help determine eligibility prior to purchase? I can speak to that a little bit, and then I'm happy to hand it over to you. So we at Blueprint Kentucky, we don't do those phase ones, but our state partners do. And if you're interested in purchasing, yes, absolutely do a phase one. Do not buy that property, like do not follow through with that transaction without that phase one in place. And I think Jeff kind of spoke to that earlier as far as being on the hook for, was it 10 grand for water monitoring now? So you definitely want to get that phase one. And feel free to email me, tyler.mcdaniel@uky.edu. I can hook you up with Kirsten O'Leary. We'll get you the form for that phase one. And we can also talk to you more about that process. It's a pretty simple form. I think it's like maybe 4 pages, and we can help you through it. So you
Yeah,
please holler.
yeah, and I'll say we work with the state partners. That's again having those relationships with Kirsten and other members of the cabinet is just critical. They are great partners. Sarah Ellis, who's our Brownfields manager, is on the webinar today, and she's a great resource for this as well. So feel free to reach out to Sarah or myself, and we'll help you through. We use our EPA funds and we work with the state all the time to get phase ones, whether it's for our properties or properties that we know nonprofits are trying to acquire. We're always interested in getting projects the proper environmental documentation on the front end and then getting properties entered into the state's 415 program on the back end. So we're always willing to help with that. It's just so critical, and I can't say it enough. We bought a lot of property here in Louisville. The metro government's bought a lot of property over the last 5 or 6 years, and I think we're always like make sure we have enough due diligence period to get our phase one. The project I'm referencing, by the way, is Colonial Gardens. So any of you that go down to Iroquois Amphitheater and enjoy a bite to eat or a little bit something to drink before you go to an event there at Iroquois Amphitheater. That's the project I'm talking about. It's a former dry cleaner site, and we have groundwater monitoring that we had to do. It's a great project. It's not the developer's fault. It's truly the city's fault, not being patient and not doing our due diligence on the front end to complete the transaction.
Yeah, and once again, you mentioned 415. 415 for those of y'all who are unfamiliar is all about liability protection. So it provides those protections for you against the future liability to say that you've done everything you can. I think it was our March webinar was actually about 415. So if y'all would like to learn more about that, please go to the Blueprint Kentucky YouTube page. There's my plug. Um, I do have a couple more questions here for you. Uh, in you talking about like all the considerations around redevelopment and like how you build these partnerships early on, um, I think that this can be a huge intimidating prospect for communities who've never done it before. And if there are any like, are there any tools or good reference materials or best practices that you would point communities towards if they're doing this for the first time?
I think I really do. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm going to give Kirsten a bunch of work, but I just think working with you know groups like Tyler, groups like people like Kirsten at the state. We worked a lot with Nathan Hancock on our Rhodia site. In fact, I joke a lot with Nathan when we were out there doing our site visit with him as we were getting ready to do our solicitation of interest. As we were on the site, a red fox kind of popped out of one of the random holes that are left from the tank removals on the site. And I said, there you go. It's cleaned up. There's a red fox. We're good. We're in the middle of like one of the most urban parts of the city. And it's like, there's a red fox in the middle of the city. But no, in all seriousness, I do think just, reaching out to the people that have done the work in the state and our partners at the state are just going to be important. They're more than willing to help you go through this step by step. Again, our team's happy to do that as well. We're happy to be a resource for our partner, our cities throughout the state. I mean, we know there's a lot of these properties that exist, and we want to be helpful. But in terms of resources, it really is you got to get one under your belt and then you do another one. I mean, every single one of them is different. The journey is slightly the same, but it kind of becomes a choose your own adventure novel as you go through it and you look at the properties. So
Yeah, and my understanding of the process as well is that once you go through the brownfields process, that your sort of eligibility and the way that you're looked on favorably for other pools of money is increased. So once you kind of do your due diligence in this process, it can reap rewards beyond that. Um, and I do want to ask about too. You had mentioned like some unexpected hiccups, particularly um, around like reland and some of the covenants maybe. Um, and I'm just curious to hear about other examples of hiccups you've faced and like how you met those and got past them.
yeah, oh, I think our biggest hiccup I think we've ever faced is we've done a brownfield remediation was when we discovered the original channel for Beargrass Creek. Like you got to learn what landfill techniques in the 1800s looked like, which is quite different than what they look like now. So it's there's some we have those real physical challenges. Anytime we get into a site, we know once we're in the site, we're going to run into something else. I mean, the Rhodia site's another great example where as we're remediating the site, we're running into places where we're still getting hot spots, even though we've done the best core drilling and all the things that we do to try to determine how deep the contamination goes and where we're going to have hot spots. But you're still going to hit those areas and just trying to be able to pivot and not get frustrated and just kind of continue to push forward. Those are the things you have to expect the unexpected. It's like remodeling your house. You're going to raise your eyebrow and be like, why did they put that pipe there? And where does that go? And what was in that tank? So it's just you have to be ready for it over and over again. And hopefully you don't hit human bones.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other set of
Yeah,
regulatory pieces to sort out
yeah,
with the Kentucky
absolutely.
Heritage Council, probably. Um, I got two more questions and then we'll wrap up for the day. I think I'm generally just curious about what you were mentioning the Lynn Family Stadium and the idea that the city owns the land, but the entity owns sort of the operational pieces. So how you got to that point of developing that as a stipulation of your partnership.
Yeah, again, so we're talking about stabilizing projects and what can we do short of providing cash into the deal and make sure that we're providing benefit for the taxpayers. I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do is protect the taxpayers on these deals. And so I think that one of the things that it's easiest for us to do for a development project like this is we can abate taxes, property taxes. Again, we're going to get a tax benefit from the stadium because there's local occupational license fees that are being generated there. There are state sales taxes. There's transient room tax being generated from the visitors that are coming in to see events at the stadium. So I think that we do fiscal impact reports like here's what this project is going to generate in terms of tax revenue for the city and the state. If we keep it on the city wasn't earning a lot of property tax from the land to begin with. Again, these were pretty underused properties, and they were pretty devalued by the PVA. So we weren't earning a whole lot of ad valorem property tax. So that the fact that are able to give up, the tens of thousands of dollars to get hundreds of thousands of dollars annually into the city's coffers, that was one way to accomplish that. What that property tax relief did for the developer, it helps make their operating income go up. It helps them get more debt so that they can go and privately finance the stadium, which is what they did. So they did get some public subsidy from they're getting a better lease rate and right now free land, but they're going to be on the hook for that eventually, and the state is providing a little bit in terms of rebates on sales taxes and withholding taxes.
Well, so very much a cost benefit thing.
Yeah.
You give a little, you get a lot back, kind of.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and really, I'd say the quick way for me to say all that was we're looking at performance-based incentives. So in other words, the taxpayers aren't on the hook if the development doesn't perform. If the development performs, the taxpayers are getting something, they're getting a benefit out of it. And I'm not talking about like going to soccer games. I'm talking about a financial benefit, a fiscal benefit to the city government.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my final question, potentially my final question, depending on if the answer spurs more questions, is just like early on in this process when you're defining roles, um, when you're really trying to feel out like the site reuse vision and the end use, how can you sort of how can you ensure that you found a good developer, that you're sort of everyone's holding something in a way that makes sense, and is fair for everyone?
Well, I think what we usually do is we kind of look at what are our risks and our costs associated with any development group. I will say for all the big projects that I've talked about today, they're all being done by local developers. So these are people that we know. These are people that have done projects in town. We can point to things that they've done. We know things that they've done. We know businesses that they own, and we know they're rooted here. So it's not just somebody that's coming to take and extract from our community and not provides a benefit back. But I mean, you anytime you look at getting into a public-private partnership, you're taking a risk. So I just say do your due diligence on the front end, understand what the financials of the deal are, understand who the players in the deal are, and understand what their end goals are. What's their exit strategy from their project? Because that's ultimately the end game. A developer will develop something and then sell it. I don't mean to, make it so crass, but that's the game. And I think, in all the cases of these developments, we've got long-term local people completing the projects and completing the projects with pride and, willing to take a lower return on their investment in order to bring something good to the community and transform a piece of property that's been underused for a long time.
And I think also with them being local developers, I feel like, people want to see their neighbors winning and succeeding. Because that sort of the rising tide lifts all ships, and when you can see it happening locally, it's inspiring, maybe to you to take a step forward yourself. Um, so with that, I want to thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you to Keith. Thank you to everyone who came here today to watch this. I really appreciate all y'all's time as presenters and putting this presentation together and answering some questions. Really great information. If you have any questions for me, feel free to email. Um, Please subscribe to our YouTube page where you can find all these really great webinars from the past. Our next one coming up on June 25th is going to be about site reuse vision. So just kind of that topic generally, as well as some engagement tools that can help you kind of determine site reuse with people who live in the impacted area, as well as a little bit of conversation about data and how to use data to sort of get at what those site reuse end goals could be. So join us for that. Once again, major thanks to Jeff for that really great information he just shared. Thank you so much. Keep doing the good work.
All right. Thank you all. It's great to be with you this afternoon. Have a great day.
Cool.
Thanks.
See ya.